Imagine setting sail into the vast, uncharted Pacific Ocean with no modern instruments, guided only by the stars and your instincts. How did ancient Polynesian voyagers navigate thousands of miles across open water to discover and settle islands like Hawaii and New Zealand? Uncover the incredible secrets of their seafaring prowess and the epic journeys that forever changed the map of the world. Close your eyes. Imagine waking up in the middle of an endless ocean, no land in sight, only the sound of the waves gently folding against the hull of a canoe. The horizon surrounds you completely, a soft blue circle where the sea and sky become one. The morning air tastes of salt and sunlight. You feel the slow rhythm of the swells beneath you, rising and falling, like the calm breathing of the planet itself. Now imagine that this isn't a dream. This is your world, your home. For the Polynesian voyagers, this vast ocean was not something to be feared or conquered. It was the center of life, a living highway that connected hundreds of islands across the Pacific. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, we'll explore one of the most extraordinary chapters in human history, the story of how ancient navigators crossed the largest ocean on Earth, long before compasses, charts, or modern instruments. To understand their journey, we must first understand the setting, the Pacific itself. It covers more than one-third of our planet's surface, stretching over 165 million square kilometers. From the coasts of Asia and the Americas to the scattered islands of Polynesia, it is a world of unimaginable scale. For early humans, this was the final frontier. Beyond each horizon lay only water, more water, and perhaps, if fortune smiled, another island hidden beyond the curve of the earth. And yet, thousands of years ago, long before the birth of ancient Greece, before the pyramids of Egypt had reached their full height, people were already living among the islands of the Pacific, moving, exploring, and settling with purpose and confidence. How did they do it? How did ancient people, without maps or metal tools, manage to cross such distances? How did they find their way back, again and again, through open water that to most of us looks the same in every direction? The story begins far from where we might expect, not in the heart of the Pacific, but in the islands of Southeast Asia. Around 5,000 years ago, in what is today Taiwan, lived a people who spoke an early form of the Austronesian languages. They were skilled farmers and fishers. They built small outrigger canoes, light and fast, perfect for traveling between nearby islands. Bit by bit, generation after generation, they began to move southward, to the Philippines, to Borneo, to the Spice Islands, and beyond. Each step was small, but each step carried them closer to the open sea. At first, they hugged the coasts, never losing sight of land, but over centuries their confidence grew. They learned how to read the waves, how to use the flight of birds as signs of nearby islands, and how to remember the rising and setting points of the stars. Slowly, they developed a mastery of their environment that would allow their descendants to reach places thousands of miles apart, places as distant as Hawaii, Rapa Nui, and New Zealand. This great migration was not the act of a single tribe or a single moment. It was a movement of entire cultures, carried by the rhythm of the sea. Archaeologists trace it through pottery, stone tools, and language. The early stages are marked by what scholars call the Lapita culture, a seafaring people who around 1500 BCE began to appear across the islands of Melanesia and western Polynesia. They left behind distinctive pottery with geometric designs, fragments that tell us where they traveled and when. From the Bismarck Archipelago near Papua New Guinea, they spread eastward to Samoa and Tonga, the western edge of the Polynesian Triangle, and from there, the great age of Polynesian voyaging began. Imagine standing on a beach in ancient Samoa, Before you stretches a horizon of nothing but blue. No sails, no clouds of dust that mark a distant shore, just the wind, the smell of salt, and the deep, steady beat of the ocean. You know that beyond that line lies another island, maybe 100 miles away, maybe 1,000, but you have never seen it. You only know it exists because the ocean tells you so. To a Polynesian navigator, the sea is not empty, it is alive with information. The direction of the swells, the movement of the clouds, the way the wind changes at dawn, all of it speaks. The navigator listens, feels, remembers. He learns the shape of each island's shadow on the ocean, a phenomenon modern science calls a reflected swell. Even hundreds of miles away, an island can create subtle disturbances in the rhythm of the waves, and a skilled wayfinder can sense it through the motion of the canoe. But we'll explore their techniques later. For now, think about what this means. The Polynesians saw the ocean not as a barrier, but as a road, a series of pathways connecting every island. They called it Te Moana Nui, a Kiwa, the great ocean of Kiwa. It wasn't a void, it was a living network. This perspective is one of the keys to understanding their success. While most ancient civilizations focused on building walls and borders, the Polynesians built connections. Their society revolved around exchange of goods, of stories, of knowledge. Navigators were revered not only as sailors, but as keepers of wisdom. They memorized entire star maps, oral charts of the ocean, where each star marked a direction, a time of year, a path between islands. When they set out to explore, it was rarely in isolation. Each voyage was the work of a community, builders, farmers, priests, and families, all working together to create something that would carry them safely into the unknown. The double-hulled canoe, or waka, was not just a vessel, it was a floating world. And yet the ocean was not always kind. There were storms, unpredictable currents, and months of uncertainty. But even here, their understanding of nature gave them an advantage. They could read the signs of an approaching storm in the color of the clouds or the smell of the air. They knew when to wait, when to set sail, and when to turn back. Over time, their voyages became longer. They reached as far east as Rapa Nui, more than 3,500 kilometers from the nearest inhabited island. They sailed north to Hawaii and south to Aotearoa, New Zealand, crossing one of the most dangerous stretches of sea on Earth. These were journeys of weeks, sometimes months, without sight of land, and yet they arrived, not by luck, but by design. When European explorers finally entered the Pacific in the 16th and 17th centuries, they were astonished to find it already inhabited by people who shared a common language, art, and mythology, despite being separated by thousands of miles. Captain James Cook, one of the first Europeans to study Polynesian navigation, wrote with admiration of their skill. He realized that what he and his crew accomplished with charts and instruments, the Polynesians had been doing for centuries with memory and intuition. Modern science has confirmed what Cook suspected. Genetic studies, radiocarbon dating, and computer simulations all point to the same conclusion. The settlement of the Pacific was one of humanity's greatest achievements, a deliberate, sustained process of exploration that unfolded over thousands of years. But perhaps the most fascinating part of this story is not the scale of their voyages, but the mindset that made them possible. To cross the ocean, you must trust it. You must accept that the sea is both friend and teacher. Polynesian voyagers did not fight the ocean, they learned from it. Their success depended on patience, observation, and respect for the rhythms of nature. When we think of exploration today, we often imagine conquest, the planting of flags, the claiming of new lands. But in the Pacific, exploration was an act of harmony. To navigate meant to listen, to travel meant to remember. Knowledge was not written down, but sung, chanted, passed from one generation to the next. In every Polynesian culture, the ocean has its own stories. In Hawaii, navigators spoke of the god Kanaloa, lord of the deep sea. In Aotearoa, They told of Coupe, the legendary explorer who discovered New Zealand by following the movements of an octopus. In Tahiti, voyagers offered prayers to Tangaroa, god of the ocean, before each departure. These were not superstitions, they were acknowledgments of the forces that guided them. Spirituality and navigation were one and the same. Now imagine yourself again in that canoe. The sun is setting, the sky turns gold, then violet, then deep blue. One by one the stars appear, first bright points near the horizon, then entire constellations. Each one is a marker, a direction, a companion. You lean back, watching them rise, and you understand that this is the map. No paper, no compass, just the memory of the sky. The Pacific, for all its immensity, was never empty. It was filled with meaning, the pulse of swells, the rhythm of tides, the voices of birds, the scent of islands carried on the wind. And within that living network, the Polynesians found their path. When we speak of their navigation, we often focus on technique, the reading of stars, the interpretation of waves, but at its heart, this achievement was something deeper. It was a philosophy, a way of being in the world. To be a navigator was to be in constant dialogue with nature, to understand that every movement of the sea was a message, every star a reminder of home. This, perhaps, is the true secret of the Pacific, not just that humans crossed it, but that they did so with balance, humility, and grace. They did not impose themselves on the ocean, they joined it. So as we begin our journey through this story, let the thought linger in your mind that somewhere, thousands of years ago, beneath the same stars that shine above us tonight, a small canoe set out from a distant island, carrying families' dreams and the quiet confidence that beyond the horizon there would be another home. That confidence, that faith in the sea, is what made the Pacific not a barrier, but a bridge, and that is how the greatest ocean on Earth became the heart of one of humanity's most astonishing adventures. Now, take a slow breath, let the sound of the waves return, let your thoughts drift across the open water. We'll continue this journey soon, as we meet the unsung navigators, the true masters of the ocean, who made the impossible possible. Forget Columbus for a moment. Forget Magellan, Cook, and all the names you learned in school. Tonight, we travel further back in time, to a world where maps did not exist, and yet the greatest navigators who ever lived were already charting courses across the largest ocean on Earth. These were the Polynesian voyagers, the true masters of the Pacific. When most people think of exploration, they picture European sails on the horizon, galleons with tall masts and iron cannons. But centuries, even millennia before that, men and women were crossing open water in wooden vessels, guided not by instruments, but by knowledge passed down through memory, chant, and story. To appreciate their achievement, we need to understand who they were. The Polynesians were part of a vast cultural and linguistic family known as the Austronesians, people who spread from the island of Taiwan across the entire Pacific and Indian Oceans. Their languages stretch in a chain from Madagascar off the coast of Africa, across Indonesia and the Philippines, all the way to Hawaii, Easter Island, and New Zealand. It is one of the widest linguistic distributions in the world, and it tells a story written not in ink, but in wind and tide. By around 1500 BCE, these seafarers had reached the islands of Samoa and Tonga. Archaeologists mark this moment as the birth of the Polynesian world. From these islands, over the next 2,000 years, their descendants would push farther and farther east and south, settling some of the most remote places on Earth. No other culture in human history has traveled farther over open ocean without the use of metal tools, writing, or navigational devices. Imagine standing among the coconut palms on a beach in ancient Tonga. Behind you, a small village hums with the sound of evening. The smell of roasted breadfruit fills the air. Before you, the ocean stretches into the darkening sky. Out there, unseen but known, lie other islands, invisible connections in a mental map that extends for thousands of miles. Somewhere across that horizon is Tahiti. Beyond Tahiti lies the distant curve of Hawaii, and far to the south, beyond storm and cold, lies Aotearoa, the land we now call New Zealand. To reach any of them, you would need to cross open water for weeks, sometimes months. Yet the Polynesians did it again and again. They were not reckless adventurers drifting at random. They were deliberate, disciplined navigators. The modern word wayfinding only hints at the complexity of their craft. They memorized the entire sky, every star, every seasonal shift, every pattern of rising and setting points along the horizon. Each star served as a directional marker, a celestial signpost. A navigator might know hundreds of them, each associated with specific winds, currents, and islands. During the day, when the stars disappeared, they turned to the sea itself. They could tell direction by the shape and rhythm of the waves. In the open Pacific, swells come from many sources: trade winds, storms, distant shores, each creating its own pattern. A skilled navigator could feel the interaction of those waves through the movement of the canoe, the roll, the pitch, the subtle vibration of water against the hull, all contained information. To us, it would be imperceptible. To them, it was language. Birds offered another set of clues. Certain species, like the naughty tern or the frigate bird, rarely stray far from land. When these birds appeared in the morning sky, voyagers knew they were within reach of an island. The color of the water changed near reefs, shifting from deep blue to turquoise. The clouds gathered differently above islands, reflecting the light of lagoons beneath them. Every sense was engaged. Vision, hearing, touch, even smell, all used to read the world. European sailors often thought these methods mystical, even magical, but they were not magic. They were observation, practiced with extraordinary precision. Centuries before telescopes or sextants, Polynesian navigators were scientists of the sea. Each voyage required immense preparation. A chief, or ariki, might command the expedition, but the heart of it was the navigator, the tatai or wayfinder. He trained for years, sometimes decades, under the guidance of a master. Knowledge was transmitted orally, through ritual, through chants that encoded the positions of stars, the distances between islands, and the cycles of ocean currents. Nothing was written down, everything was carried in the mind. A navigator would build what is called a star compass, not a physical object, but a mental framework. The horizon was divided into houses, each associated with a rising or setting star. As the canoe moved, the navigator tracked which stars passed overhead, recalculating position in his memory. At night, he could orient the vessel by the stars. During the day, by the swells in the sun. It was a living system, flexible and adaptive, refined by generations of trial and success. Even when clouds covered the sky, navigators had ways to find their bearings. They watched the direction of long ocean swells that persist even under overcast skies. They studied the flight of seabirds returning to their nests in the evening. They looked for drifting debris, the color of water, the smell of distant rain. Every detail was a clue, part of a vast puzzle that only experience could solve. Polynesian voyaging was not merely technical, it was also spiritual. Before a voyage, navigators and crew participated in rituals to seek protection from the gods and the ancestors. The ocean was not an enemy, but a being with its own will, to be respected, not defied. Prayers were offered to Tangaroa, the god of the sea, or to Kanaloa, or to other deities depending on the island culture. These ceremonies created a sense of unity and focus before the long journey ahead. When the time came to depart, the double-hulled canoe was loaded with supplies, water stored in gourds, preserved breadfruit, taro, yams, coconuts, and dried fish. There were families aboard, sometimes entire communities seeking new lands. They brought pigs, chickens, dogs, and the plants they would need to survive on the next island. Each voyage carried not just people, but the blueprint of a civilization. As the canoe pushed away from shore, drums might sound, voices might rise and chant, but soon only the sea remained. The voyage began in silence, broken only by the creak of ropes and the steady slap of waves. The navigator crouched near the bow, eyes half closed, feeling the motion of the hull. His memory was his compass, his confidence his chart. Modern researchers have tried to reconstruct these skills. One of the most famous efforts came in the 1970s, when a traditional canoe named Hokulea was built in Hawaii. Its purpose was to prove that long-distance voyaging across the Pacific was possible using only traditional methods. The Hawaiian navigator Nainoa Thompson trained under Maupiailug, a master navigator from the tiny Micronesian island of Satawal. Mau was one of the last living experts in non-instrument navigation, a man who could cross hundreds of miles guided only by his senses. Under his guidance, the Hokulea sailed from Hawaii to Tahiti, a distance of more than 2,500 miles, without a compass, map, or sextant. The voyage was a success, and it reignited pride across the Pacific. What archaeologists and historians had suspected for decades was now proven by practice. The Polynesians truly were the greatest navigators in human history. But to understand the scale of their accomplishment, we have to compare it with what other civilizations were doing at the same time. When Polynesians were settling remote islands like Easter Island, European ships were still confined to the Mediterranean. The Vikings, celebrated for their daring, crossed the North Atlantic, a distance of perhaps 1,500 miles, guided mostly by coastal landmarks and the sun. Polynesians, in contrast, were sailing over open ocean 3 or 4 times that distance, with no land in sight for weeks, and they did it repeatedly with precision. Even more remarkable is that they often traveled both ways. These were not accidental drifts. They found islands, settled them, and then maintained contact with the homelands they left behind. Recent genetic and linguistic evidence shows regular movement between far-flung islands, not a one-way migration, but a network of exchange. How did such navigation survive across generations? Through teaching, through song, and through ritual. The oral tradition of Polynesian cultures preserved memory in ways that written text could not. Stories of great navigators, semi-divine figures who journeyed between islands, were both myth and manual, symbolic but also instructive. They taught the next generation how to observe, how to interpret, how to trust the sea. Each island had its own legendary navigator. In Tahiti, there was Hero, the daring sailor who defied storms. In Aotearoa, Kupe, who discovered the long white cloud of New Zealand. In Samoa, the goddess Sina and her journey to the underworld, reminding sailors of the spiritual balance between life and the ocean. Through these myths, memory lived on. For European chroniclers encountering Polynesians for the first time, it was almost impossible to grasp how such people could exist. Captain Cook, in his journals, described his astonishment at finding people across the Pacific who spoke related languages, shared cultural motifs, and seemed to know the stars intimately. The scholar David Lewis, centuries later, would describe their navigation as a triumph of human awareness. It wasn't magic, it was mastery. We often imagine that the Polynesians lived in isolation, each island a small world apart. But in truth, they were connected. Their ocean was a web of roots, a network of knowledge. They traded obsidian for shells, bark cloth for feathers, stories for songs. Canoes carried news, marriages, and alliances. The Pacific was not a void separating them. It was a highway uniting them. Think about what this means for our understanding of history. The narrative most of us learned centers on Europe, on explorers who discovered lands already long inhabited. But the Polynesians had completed a far greater journey long before that story began. By the time Columbus sailed west in 1492, Polynesian voyagers had already explored an area larger than all the continents of the Old World combined. Their realm stretched from the equator to the southern latitudes, from the coral atolls of Micronesia to the volcanic peaks of Hawaii. It is one of the most extraordinary feats of expansion in human history, and yet for centuries their achievements were ignored or misunderstood. Western scholars once believed that the islands of the Pacific were settled by accidental drift, canoes blown off course by storms. But modern evidence and the testimony of Polynesians themselves show that these were deliberate voyages. The navigators knew exactly what they were doing. Their canoes were strong, their skills precise, their goals clear. Some of the best physical evidence of this sophistication comes from archaeology. On many islands, the remains of ancient canoe houses, massive stone foundations where vessels were built and stored, still stand. The scale of these structures shows how important voyaging was to daily life. Stone tools found nearby, often made from basalt imported from distant islands, prove that trade routes stretched across hundreds of miles. Linguistics tells the same story. Words for sailing, stars, and canoes share common roots across the Pacific. The term for the sacred double canoe, waka, appears in languages from Tonga to New Zealand. The word for navigation itself, totai or totahi, carries not only the sense of steering, but also of wisdom and leadership. To navigate was to lead. What's perhaps most moving is that this knowledge nearly disappeared. When Europeans arrived, they brought diseases, weapons, and new technologies. Many traditional practices were suppressed or forgotten. The art of wayfinding, of reading the sea, survived only in a few isolated places, like the Caroline Islands of Micronesia. There, on the island of Satawal, the heritage of navigation was kept alive in secret, passed quietly from father to son, teacher to apprentice. Without that continuity, much of what we know today might have been lost forever. The revival of this knowledge in the 20th century was not just an act of scholarship, it was an act of cultural rebirth. When Malpialug shared his teachings with Hawaiian students in the 1970s, he was giving back something that had been nearly erased by colonialism. The voyage of the Hokulia became more than a test of skill, it became a symbol of identity. Across the Pacific, young people began to rediscover their heritage, their connection to the ocean, and their pride as descendants of the world's greatest navigators. As you listen now, imagine the ocean once again, the stars above, the waves below, the gentle creak of ropes and wood. Somewhere out there, thousands of miles from shore, a canoe glides silently through the night. On board, a navigator sits at the center, eyes fixed on the horizon, mind full of constellations and swells. He feels the motion of the sea and knows exactly where he is. To him, there is no uncertainty, only the constant breathing rhythm of the ocean. The Polynesian Navigators did not simply travel from island to island. They carried with them an entire worldview, one that saw humanity as part of nature, not separate from it. They understood balance, patience, and humility before the vastness of the sea. They measured success, not by conquest, but by connection. As the night deepens and your mind begins to drift, remember this: the Pacific was their universe, and they knew it intimately. Every wave was a line of poetry, every star a word of direction, every island a note in a song that stretched across the centuries. These were not forgotten sailors lost to time. They were the keepers of one of the greatest bodies of knowledge humanity has ever created. Knowledge born of observation, memory, and trust in the natural world. In the next part of our journey, we'll explore how they built the vessels that made this all possible, the floating worlds of wood, rope, and sail that carried families, animals, and dreams across an ocean that once seemed endless. But for now, as you rest, think of the quiet strength of those navigators. Their canoes carved paths through the Pacific, and in doing so, they mapped not just the ocean, but the limits of human courage and imagination. Let the rhythm of the waves guide you as it guided them. Let the ocean's breath lull you into calm. The navigators are still out there, in memory and in the stars, reminding us that even in the vastest emptiness, there is always a way home. Imagine standing on a beach at dawn. The tide is low, the sand cool beneath your feet. Before you, on the edge of the lagoon, a great shape takes form, the skeleton of a double-hulled canoe. The air smells of salt, smoke, and freshly cut wood. Around it, men and women move slowly, working in rhythm, their voices low, their hands steady. This is not just a boat they are building, it is the bridge between worlds, a vessel that will carry life itself across an endless ocean. The canoes of the Polynesians were masterpieces of design, crafted with precision and knowledge passed down through generations. Long before the invention of the shipyard, long before iron tools, these builders created vessels capable of crossing thousands of miles of open sea. They did it using only stone, shell, wood, and fiber, and an understanding of the ocean that was both practical and spiritual. At first glance, a traditional Polynesian canoe looks simple. Two long hulls joined by crossbeams, supporting a platform or deck, but this structure represents one of the most efficient designs in the history of maritime technology. The double hull gave stability in heavy seas. The narrow shape of each hull allowed for speed and agility. The space between them acted as a cradle for the deck, where families, supplies, and animals could travel safely. In effect, each canoe was a floating village, part ship, part sanctuary. The earliest versions were small, designed for fishing and coastal journeys, but as the Polynesian world expanded, so did their ambitions. Voyaging canoes grew larger, sometimes more than 30 meters long, with room for dozens of people and cargo. Each one took months or even years to complete. Trees had to be selected carefully, not just for size, but for spirit. A master builder might spend days walking through the forest, listening to the wind in the leaves, touching trunks, and waiting until one spoke to him. When he found the right tree, he offered a prayer and an offering, often a small gift of food or flowers, before it was felled. The process was sacred. The canoe was alive, and to harm the forest without respect was unthinkable. The logs were hollowed with stone adzes, shaped by heat, and sealed with natural resins. Lashing, the art of binding with coconut fiber rope, held everything together. No nails, no metal, just tension and balance. A well-made lashing could last for years, even decades, resisting the constant stress of waves and weather. The builders tested each joint carefully, listening for creaks, feeling for movement. When the structure was finally complete, the hulls were polished, smooth, and painted with protective oils made from nuts and tree sap. The sails, woven from pandanus leaves, were light and flexible, catching even the faintest breath of wind. Every step of the process required cooperation. It wasn't just craftsmen at work, it was the entire community. Men shaped the hulls, women wove the sails, children gathered fibers and shells. Priests oversaw rituals to bless the vessel, to ensure safe passage and favorable winds. Songs were sung, stories told. The building of a canoe was a social event, a ceremony that reaffirmed the unity of the people. When it was finished, the launch was a day of celebration. The whole village would gather at the shore, faces painted, drums sounding. As the canoe slid into the sea for the first time, it was greeted not with fear, but with joy, the same joy that comes with setting forth into possibility. In modern terms, these vessels were marvels of engineering. A double-hulled canoe is inherently stable because of its wide stance on the water. It can roll gently with the waves, but resists capsizing even in rough seas. The two hulls also reduce drag, allowing for greater speed than a single broad hull. This efficiency made it possible to sail long distances with minimal effort, conserving energy and supplies. The hulls were connected by wooden crossbeams and an upper platform, a kind of bridge that served as both deck and living space. On longer voyages, temporary shelters were built from mats and poles, providing shade from the sun and protection from rain. Storage was an art in itself. Beneath the deck, woven baskets held dried fish, taro roots, and coconuts. Water was stored in gourds and bamboo tubes. Everything had its place, balanced carefully to maintain stability. Fire was carried in covered bowls of sand and ash, kept smoldering for cooking. Nothing was wasted. Every resource was precious. The canoe was not only a means of travel, but a self-contained ecosystem capable of sustaining life for weeks or even months at sea. The sails, triangular or crab claw shaped, were designed for flexibility. They could be adjusted to catch winds from multiple directions, giving the navigator greater control than might seem possible without a rudder. Steering was done with large paddles or by shifting weight and adjusting the sail's angle. It took constant attention and unbroken dialogue between sailor and sea. The crew moved together in quiet coordination, guided by the navigator's word or gesture. When we look at these canoes today, recreated in museums or sailing once again under the banner of cultural revival, it's easy to forget how advanced they were for their time. Modern experiments have shown that a well-constructed Polynesian double-hulled canoe can travel at speeds of 10 to 15 knots, comparable to early European sailing ships. And yet these vessels were lighter, simpler, and built without metal. They were also repairable at sea, using spare lashings and fibers carried on board. If a beam cracked or a line frayed, the crew could fix it in motion. Their technology was resilient because it was organic, made from the same materials as the world around them. But the true genius of Polynesian boat building was not just in the materials, it was in the mindset. Each island group developed its own design traditions, adapted to local conditions. In Micronesia, smaller proa canoes used asymmetric hulls and shunting sails for swift single-person travel. In Samoa and Tonga, larger double-hulled vessels called alaya or kalia carried families and goods. In Hawaii, the Great Wā Kalua served as ocean-going voyagers, while in New Zealand, the Maori built long waka aurwa, capable of carrying warriors and settlers across vast distances. Every design reflected centuries of experimentation and adaptation, proof that these builders understood their environment as intimately as any modern engineer understands a machine. The art of lashing deserves special attention. To bind two great hulls together with rope seems simple, but in practice it was a precise and demanding craft. The fibers, stripped from coconut husks, were soaked, twisted, and dried to form cords of remarkable strength. Builders learned how to tie them in complex patterns that distributed pressure evenly, allowing the structure to flex rather than break under stress. In Western shipbuilding, rigidity was the goal. In Polynesian design, flexibility was life. The ocean moves, and the canoe must move with it. Strength came not from stiffness, but from harmony. In many cultures, the sea was seen as something to be feared, unpredictable, deadly, alien. But in Polynesia, it was kin. The ocean was a relative, a living being to whom one owed respect. This relationship shaped every stage of canoe building. The materials were gathered with ceremony, the work done in rhythm with nature. When the vessel was complete, it was named, blessed, and sometimes given offerings of flowers, fish, or kava. The people spoke to it as they would to a friend or ancestor. For them, the canoe was not separate from life. It was life. What's astonishing is how far these vessels could travel. Modern reconstructions have proven that double-hulled canoes can sail more than 2,000 miles without resupply, sustained entirely by the provisions they carry and what can be caught along the way. Fish were caught using lines and hooks carved from shell or bone. Rainwater was collected from sails and stored. Coconut palms brought on voyages provided both food and fresh liquid. Nothing on board was wasted. Even waste from the animals, pigs and chickens, was used as fertilizer once new islands were reached. Each voyage was a miniature version of the world the voyagers hoped to build when they arrived. Consider what it meant to set out across such distances. There were no charts, no rescue ships, no guarantee of land, only the navigator's memory and the crew's trust. And yet, they went, not once, but countless times. Each successful voyage strengthened the web of routes that connected the islands of the Pacific. Over centuries, these routes became what we might call the ocean roads, invisible highways linking cultures thousands of miles apart. These roads carried not only people and goods, but ideas. Through them, songs, stories, and technologies spread from island to island, creating a shared Pacific identity that still echoes today. When European explorers finally entered the Pacific in the 16th and 17th centuries, they marveled at the craftsmanship of these canoes. Early accounts describe them as swift, graceful, and remarkably seaworthy. Some European captains even admitted that their own ships, though made of iron and oak, could not match the maneuverability of the Polynesian vessels in rough surf. In Cook's journals, he describes watching a Tahitian double canoe outpace his own ship with ease, gliding across the waves like a bird. To him, it was both humbling and inspiring. Yet the story of these canoes is not only one of technology, it's a story of community. The construction of each vessel drew together entire societies. Chiefs provided direction and resources, priests offered blessings, craftsmen shaped the wood, weavers made the ropes, fishermen supplied food to sustain the workers. Even those who never set foot on the canoe shared in its purpose. In a very real sense, the canoe belonged to everyone. It embodied the spirit of cooperation, the understanding that survival depended on unity. This collective spirit extended to the voyage itself. Life on board required trust and discipline. Every member of the crew had a role: paddlers, steersmen, cooks, lookouts, and navigators. Each relied on the others. A mistake could mean disaster, but teamwork meant success. The voyage was both test and teacher. It demanded patience, endurance, and humility before nature. And when the travelers reached a new island, they brought that same cooperative energy to building homes, planting crops, and forming new communities. Exploration, in this sense, was not conquest, it was creation. Archaeologists studying ancient Polynesian sites have found traces of this interconnection. On islands separated by thousands of miles, they find the same types of adzes, ornaments, and pottery styles. They find similar house foundations, burial customs, and religious structures. Even plants tell the story. Crops like taro, sweet potato, and breadfruit appear across the Pacific, evidence that voyagers intentionally carried them to new lands. The double-hulled canoe was the means by which this biological and cultural exchange took place. It was not just transportation, it was the engine of civilization. In some ways, the canoes mirrored the societies that built them: flexible, balanced, resilient, and always in motion. They were designed to live in harmony with the environment, not to dominate it. When storms came, the crew didn't fight the waves. They adjusted the sails, aligned with the swells, and let the ocean carry them. Survival depended on listening to the wind, to the water, to each other. This philosophy of balance shaped not only their voyages but their worldview. Today, As modern Polynesian navigators revive these traditions, they often speak of the deep emotional connection that comes with sailing a traditional canoe. On a voyage, the boundaries between human and nature blur. The navigator feels the world as a single living system: the stars above, the ocean below, the breath of wind, the warmth of the sun. In those moments, they say, you understand what their ancestors knew: that the ocean is not a void between islands, but a great unifying space. It's easy to forget how revolutionary this was in its time. Across much of the ancient world, travel was limited by geography: mountains, deserts, forests, political borders. The Polynesians transcended those limits. They built bridges not of stone, but of wind and wave. Their ships made it possible to inhabit one of the most remote regions on Earth, turning scattered islands into a connected world. They didn't just sail across the ocean, they built it, transforming it into something human, mapped in memory and song. Imagine one of those canoes now, resting at anchor in a quiet lagoon. The night air is warm, the sails are furled, the deck creaks softly with the tide, the stars shimmer above, reflected in the still water. You can almost hear the whisper of generations: builders, navigators, voyagers, all part of the same story. The same road. The ocean roads are still there, invisible but enduring. They exist in the currents, in the constellations, in the memory of the Pacific peoples. Each wave that breaks on a distant shore carries echoes of the canoes that once crossed it: the rhythm of paddles, the sound of wind in woven sails, the heartbeat of humanity's greatest adventure. As you drift toward sleep, think of the builders who carved their dreams into wood, who lashed hope and knowledge into form, who launched their creations into the infinite blue, with nothing but trust in their craft and in the ocean itself. Their hands shaped the vessels that shaped the world. Their canoes were more than tools, they were prayers made real, and so the ocean roads were born, pathways of courage and creation that linked the scattered islands of the Pacific into a single living world. In the next part of our journey, we will follow those roads farther, tracing how the Polynesians expanded across millennia, leaving behind clues, monuments, and memories. But for now, listen to the waves, feel their slow, even rhythm. The road is still there, beneath the stars, waiting to carry us onward. The ocean roads stretched farther than anyone could imagine. Across thousands of miles of open sea, the Polynesian voyagers sailed, guided by the stars, the waves, and the memory of their ancestors. From the shores of Asia to the farthest reaches of the Pacific, they carried not only their bodies, but their languages, their myths, their plants, and their dreams. And over centuries, they turned the emptiest part of the planet into a living network of islands, connected by courage and knowledge. If we could watch this story unfold from above, as if through the slow lens of time, we would see the Pacific gradually come alive with light. Each new island settled would flicker into being: a fire on a beach, a village by a lagoon, a cluster of sails at dawn. Generation after generation, those lights would move farther apart, stretching eastward, southward, and northward, until they formed the Great Triangle of Polynesia, its points marked by Hawaii in the north, Aotearoa, New Zealand, in the southwest, and Rapa Nui, or Easter Island, in the southeast. An oceanic empire not built by kings or armies, but by navigators and builders, bound by wind and wave. But where did this odyssey begin? To find its roots, we must travel back to the shores of ancient Taiwan, some 5,000 years ago. There, a people who spoke early Austronesian languages began to move outward, perhaps driven by population growth, perhaps by curiosity, or by the pull of the unknown. They traveled through the Philippines, into Indonesia, and east toward the islands of Melanesia. These were the ancestors of the Lapita people, the first true ocean explorers. Archaeologists named them after the site where their distinctive pottery was first found, Lapita, in New Caledonia. These pots, decorated with intricate geometric patterns pressed into the clay, are among the most important clues in tracing the spread of Polynesian culture. Fragments of Lapita pottery have been found across a vast region, from the Bismarck Archipelago near Papua New Guinea all the way to Tonga and Samoa. Each shard is like a footprint, a marker of where people once landed, built homes, and sailed again. The Lapita people were the bridge between the world of Asia and the new world of the Pacific. They brought with them domesticated animals, pigs, dogs, and chickens, as well as plants like taro, yam, and breadfruit. Their canoes grew larger and stronger, and their understanding of the sea deepened with each voyage. By around 1000 BCE, they had reached the western edge of what would become Polynesia. From there, their descendants began to shape a new world. For centuries, life flourished in the islands of Samoa and Tonga. Communities grew, traditions evolved, and languages branched into new dialects. Here, the foundations of Polynesian culture took root: systems of governance led by chiefs, complex social hierarchies, art, and ritual. But the sea was always calling. As populations expanded and curiosity persisted, voyagers once again set their sails toward the east, seeking new lands beyond the horizon. We do not know exactly when this great eastward push began, but the evidence suggests that by the first few centuries CE, Polynesians had reached the Society Islands, including Tahiti. From there, over the following centuries, their canoes fanned out across the Pacific, reaching places that, for millennia, no human had ever seen. To the northeast, they found Hawaii, a chain of volcanic peaks rising from the depths of the Pacific. To the southeast, they reached Rapa Nui, isolated more than 2,000 miles from the nearest inhabited island. And far to the south, they discovered Aotearoa, the most distant and temperate of all Polynesian lands, rich with forests, rivers, and mountains. By the end of this expansion, around the year 1200 CE, the Polynesian voyagers had explored an area larger than all the continents of the Old World combined. No other culture on Earth had accomplished anything like it. Each new island brought new challenges and adaptations. In the lush tropics of Tahiti, life was abundant: fish, fruit, and fertile soil. In Hawaii, the voyagers found volcanic rock and steep valleys, where they developed irrigation systems to grow taro and sweet potato. In the colder climate of Aotearoa, they had to learn to survive without many tropical plants and animals, turning instead to hunting, fishing, and cultivating hardy crops. And on Rapa Nui, with its limited resources and isolation, they built one of the most enigmatic cultures in human history. The story of Rapa Nui, or Easter Island, is perhaps the most haunting of all. Here, the descendants of the voyagers raised the colossal stone statues known as moai, each one representing an ancestor watching over the land. Carved from volcanic rock and transported across the island, these figures stood as symbols of identity, lineage, and spiritual power. For centuries, they faced inland, toward the villages and the people, as if to protect them. Archaeologists still debate how these statues were moved, but most agree that ropes, levers, and sheer human ingenuity played a role. To this day, the moai remain one of the most powerful testaments to Polynesian creativity and belief. Farther north, in Hawaii, Polynesian culture evolved into a complex society with large temples called heiau, governed by an intricate system of chiefs and priests. In Tahiti and the Society Islands, great navigators maintained links between communities, exchanging goods and knowledge. In Aotearoa, Maori tribes developed their own distinct traditions, preserving the memory of their ancestors' voyages through oral histories and carved meeting houses called waranui, where every beam and post told a story. Across the Pacific, echoes of the same culture could be found in language, art, and worldview. The Polynesian languages share deep similarities. The Hawaiian word wai means water. In Maori, it is wai as well. The word for canoe, waka va vaka, appears almost unchanged across thousands of miles. Even the stories share common threads. Many tell of a trickster demigod named Maui who fished islands from the sea, captured the sun, and brought fire to humanity. These tales, passed from one generation to the next, became both entertainment and education, preserving knowledge of navigation, geography, and survival. For centuries, these cultures thrived in relative isolation, each adapting to its unique environment while maintaining the core of shared heritage. To the voyagers, the ocean was not a void separating them, it was a pathway connecting families and gods. The Pacific was alive with meaning, every island a node in a vast network of memory. But time is relentless, and even the greatest traditions fade when unrecorded. By the time European explorers entered the Pacific in the 16th and 17th centuries, the age of great voyaging had ended. Many Polynesian societies had turned inward, focusing on their islands rather than the open sea. The knowledge of long-distance navigation, once the heartbeat of their world, had begun to fall silent. When the first European ships arrived, the encounter was both a moment of awe and tragedy. Captain James Cook, who sailed across the Pacific in the late 18th century, was among the first outsiders to truly recognize the sophistication of Polynesian navigation. He met people across vast distances who shared words, customs, and features. In his journals, Cook marveled that a people dispersed over so many thousand leagues of ocean could still understand one another. He realized that these islands were not isolated, but part of a single, interconnected world, a world that Europeans had only just begun to comprehend. Archaeology and science have since filled in many of the gaps in this story. Carbon dating, DNA analysis, and linguistic studies have confirmed what the oral traditions long maintained, that the Pacific was settled deliberately, in waves of exploration guided by expertise, not accident. Genetic research shows that all Polynesians share a common ancestry that traces back to the Lapita people, and before them to the shores of Taiwan. Their movements can be tracked not only through bones and artifacts, but through the living patterns of speech and song. Each island carries fragments of the same story, told in different accents of wind and water, and yet, for all the science, there is still mystery. There are questions archaeology cannot answer, questions about motive, emotion, and imagination. Why did they keep going? What drew them onward, beyond each horizon? Perhaps it was curiosity or population pressure. Perhaps it was something deeper, a belief that the ocean was not to be feared, but to be embraced, a trust in the world itself, a confidence that somewhere beyond the horizon, life awaited. Even today, when modern sailors retrace their roots, they speak of the same feeling, the mix of awe and belonging, of fear and peace. The ocean humbles, but it also connects. For the Polynesians, it was home. The sea was their teacher, their test, their inheritance. We can see their legacy all across the Pacific. In the temples of Hawaii, where stones still line the terraces once used for offerings to the gods of navigation. In the carved mary of Tahiti, where ancient chants are being revived. In the meeting houses of Aotearoa, where genealogies trace back to the canoes that brought each tribe to shore. And on the cliffs of Rapa Nui, where the moai still stand against the wind, silent but unbroken. Each of these places is a chapter of the same book, the great human story of movement, adaptation, and endurance. The ocean was never a barrier between these worlds. It was their road. Every island was a new verse in a song that began thousands of years ago and still echoes today. The modern rediscovery of Polynesian voyaging has breathed new life into this legacy. The canoe hokula, which first sailed from Hawaii to Tahiti in the 1970s, became a symbol of that rebirth. Since then, its crew has circumnavigated the globe, sharing the wisdom of traditional navigation with new generations. For many Pacific Islanders, this revival is not just cultural pride, it is healing. It reconnects them to their ancestors, to the ocean, and to the idea that knowledge can live in memory as powerfully as in writing. The echoes of that lost world are no longer fading, they are being sung again. Across the Pacific, schools of wayfinding have reopened. Young navigators learn to read the stars, to feel the rhythm of the swells, to trust the ocean as their ancestors once did. They say that when you sail by the stars, you are never truly lost because you carry the map inside you. And when the night sky opens above the Pacific, the same constellations shine that once guided the first canoes. The stars have not forgotten. Tonight, as you listen, imagine that long chain of islands once more, each one a point of light in the darkness, connected by invisible threads of memory. From Taiwan to Tonga, from Tahiti to Rapa Nui, from Hawaii to Aotearoa, every island whispers the same story, that humanity's reach is boundless when guided by knowledge, community, and faith in the world around us. The Pacific holds many secrets, but perhaps the greatest is this, that we have always been voyagers. From the first humans who crossed deserts and rivers to the sailors who crossed oceans, the same impulse drives us to see what lies beyond, to seek new homes, new ideas, new beginnings. The Polynesians were not the only travelers, but they were among the most remarkable. They remind us that courage and curiosity are not opposites of peace, but paths toward it. So, as we leave this chapter and drift deeper into rest, let the echoes of that world wash over you, the rhythmic chant of paddles, the low hum of wind through sails, the heartbeat of waves against the hull. The voyagers are still out there, carried on the currents of time, whispering through the sea. Their canoes, their songs, their stars, all part of a story that has never truly ended. And as we move toward the horizon of sleep, we carry that story with us, a memory of a world that once was, and still is, alive beneath the same sky. The ocean never ends. Even when you reach an island, the waves still call beyond it, whispering of other shores, other stars, other journeys waiting to begin. For the Polynesian voyagers, that call was never silenced. It lived in their blood, in their songs, and in the stories told beside the fire, long after the sails were furled and the canoes drawn ashore. We've followed their path from the islands of Taiwan to the vast expanse of the Pacific, from the first outrigger canoes to the double-hulled voyaging vessels that stitched the ocean together. We've watched them read the stars and the waves, build the ocean roads, and plant their cultures across an empire of water. Now, as our journey draws to its final horizon, we turn our gaze to the enduring spirit that drove them onward, a spirit that still lives within us all. The question has echoed for centuries. Why did they go? Why risk everything, lives, families, and futures, on the uncertain promise of what might lie beyond the horizon? The answer is as old as humanity itself. We move because we must. We explore because we wonder. And in the Polynesian world, that impulse was refined into art, into science, and into faith. For them, the ocean was not an obstacle, but an invitation. Each voyage began not with conquest, but with ceremony, a recognition of balance between humans and the natural world. Before departure, the navigator would pray to the gods of the sea, to Tangaroa, to Kanaloa, to the ancestors who had crossed before. He would ask for guidance, not mastery, for safe passage, not dominion. Then, as the canoe slipped from shore, the people left behind would sing farewell, their voices carried by the wind. To leave was not to abandon, it was to continue the story. The Polynesian expansion across the Pacific is often described as one of humanity's greatest migrations, but it was more than migration. It was the unfolding of a worldview, a philosophy of connection. Each island was part of a greater whole, a link in the vast chain of being that bound sky, ocean, and earth together. The voyagers understood that to move forward was not to leave the past behind, but to extend it, to plant the seeds of continuity in new soil. And so, wherever they landed, they brought the essence of their culture with them, the gods, the songs, the stories, and the memory of home. Over generations, these connections gave rise to a shared identity that stretched across unimaginable distances. Even today, when a Hawaiian hula dancer invokes Laka, the goddess of hula, or when a Maori carver shapes the prow of a new waka, or when a Tahitian navigator sets sail under the southern stars, they are participating in the same dialogue, a conversation between people and the ocean that has lasted for millennia. The voyager's story is in many ways the story of all humanity, a story of exploration and return. Each of us, in our own way, seeks the horizon. We search for meaning, for belonging, for new beginnings. The Polynesians remind us that such journeys do not require certainty. They require trust in the world, in ourselves, and in the paths laid down by those who came before. When European ships entered the Pacific, they encountered societies as complex and ancient as their own. But the arrival of the West brought upheaval. New diseases swept through the islands, and populations collapsed. Missionaries discouraged traditional beliefs. Colonial governments imposed new laws, new borders, and new ways of life. The art of navigation, once the heartbeat of the Pacific, was nearly lost. By the 19th century, only a handful of traditional navigators remained, their knowledge fading into silence. And yet, the ocean remembers. Its rhythms are patient. Even when human memory falters, the sea keeps its own record, in currents, in winds, in the stars reflected upon its surface. And when the time was right, that record was read again. In the 20th century, as the Pacific peoples sought to reclaim their identity, a quiet renaissance began. Historians, anthropologists, and local elders pieced together the fragments of ancient knowledge. Theories about accidental drift were challenged and replaced by a deeper understanding of deliberate navigation. But it wasn't until the 1970s that the spirit of voyaging truly returned to life. In Hawaii, a group of visionaries built a canoe the old way. They named it Hokulea, Star of Gladness. It was designed to prove that the ancestors had not merely drifted across the Pacific, but had sailed it by choice, with skill and intent. To guide the vessel, they sought the help of Maupialug, a navigator from the island of Satawal in Micronesia, one of the last keepers of the traditional wayfinding art. Mau agreed to teach them, and in doing so, he passed on knowledge that had nearly vanished from the world. In 1976, the Hokulea set sail from Hawaii to Tahiti, navigating entirely without instruments, no compass, no map, no sextant. Mau guided them by the stars, the swells, and the flight of birds. After 34 days at sea, the canoe arrived safely in Tahiti to a welcome of thousands. It was a triumph not only of navigation, but of spirit, proof that the old ways still worked, that the knowledge of the ancestors had never truly died. The voyage sparked a cultural awakening across the Pacific. New canoes were built in Samoa, Tahiti, New Zealand, and beyond. Young navigators trained under masters who had learned from Mau and his students. In 2014, the Hokulea embarked on a voyage around the entire world, spreading the message of sustainability and unity, the same principles that guided the first voyagers thousands of years ago. When it returned to Hawaii in 2017, it was greeted as a symbol of hope, a reminder that tradition and modernity need not be at odds. The ocean, after all, connects everything. To sail by the stars is to remember who we are. It is to acknowledge that the world is vast, but not divided, that every place, every person, every culture is part of a larger pattern. This understanding is deeply Polynesian, but it also speaks to something universal. The horizon is not an end, it is a beginning. The voyagers knew this. Each time they set sail, they were not leaving home, they were expanding it. In our own age, the idea of exploration has changed. We look outward still, to the deep sea, to the planets, to the stars. We build machines that travel farther and faster than any canoe could. But the questions remain the same. What lies beyond, and what does it mean to go there? The Polynesians faced those questions not with technology, but with understanding. They knew that exploration without harmony is emptiness, that true discovery is not about claiming new worlds, but about recognizing the connections between them. Their story reminds us that the greatest journeys are not measured in miles, but in meaning. Each voyage across the Pacific was a conversation between humanity and nature, a negotiation of balance, courage, and humility. Every island settled, every star memorized, every wave interpreted was an act of faith, and that faith endures. Across the Pacific today, the voices of the ancestors are rising again. Children learn to chant the names of the stars. Communities gather to rebuild traditional canoes. Elders pass down songs that describe wind patterns and constellations. Each act is a restoration of memory, a thread woven back into the vast tapestry of the ocean roads. The knowledge that once seemed lost is finding its way home, and perhaps that is the final lesson of the Polynesian voyagers, that nothing is ever truly lost when it is carried in the heart. The stars they followed still shine, the winds they rode still blow, the islands they found still rise from the sea, green and bright beneath the same sun. Their legacy is not just in history books or museums, but in the quiet persistence of human wonder. Imagine for a moment that you are on that final voyage. The night is calm. The canoe moves smoothly through the dark water, its sails full and whispering. The stars shimmer above, scattered like shells across the sky. The navigator sits near the bow, eyes half closed, tracing constellations with his thoughts. The crew sleeps in the gentle rocking of the deck. You can hear the ocean breathing, long, steady, endless. There is no fear here, no need for certainty, only the deep, unspoken understanding that you are part of something vast and alive. The ocean around you is the same ocean your ancestors crossed, the same one that touches every shore on Earth. It holds the memory of every voyage, every heartbeat, every dream that ever dared to look beyond the horizon. In its depths are the whispers of time, the Lapatop potters, the builders of canoes, the star watchers, the navigators, the families who carried hope across the sea. All of them are still here in the rhythm of the waves. As you drift, the boundary between sky and water begins to fade. The stars above seem to merge with the reflections below, until you can no longer tell where the ocean ends and the heavens begin. This is the final horizon, not a line of separation, but of unity. It is the place where past and present, land and sea, human and nature, all become one. And in that stillness, you understand what the voyagers always knew, that to journey is to live. That the world is not made of distances, but of connections, that every horizon reached reveals another beyond it. The Polynesian voyagers did not seek to conquer the Pacific. They became part of it. Their maps were written in stars and swells, their legacy in the hearts of those who remember. Their courage is quiet, enduring, and eternal. As you rest now, let their story guide you, as the stars once guided them. Let the steady rhythm of the waves carry you into peace. You are adrift, but never lost. The ocean holds you, the stars watch over you, and the voices of the ancient navigators whisper softly in the wind. Sleep, voyager. The horizon is endless, but you have already arrived.